All right, I will go ahead and call the meeting to order. And it is, if I talk slow enough, 4 o'clock. Could I get Jim Wilson to lead us in our invocation?
Let's bow as we pray, please. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the many blessings of this day. Father, we pray that the business that we undertake today is pleasing to your sight and will glorify and edify your kingdom. We bless each member of this board that we may act in a prudent manner to encompass the goals and objectives of the city of Kerrville. We pray all these things in Christ's name and for his sake. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
All right, item number 1 on the agenda is Visitors Citizens Forum. Any citizen with business not scheduled on the agenda may speak to the Economic Improvement Corporation. No deliberation or action can be taken on these items because the Open Meetings Act requires an item be posted on the agenda 72 hours before the meeting. Visitors are asked to limit their presentation to 3 minutes. Anyone want a visitor to take the podium? Go ahead.
My name is Harvey Brinkman, 821 Earl Garrett, and I just want to make you aware of something that doesn't really have anything to do with EIC, other than it is an improvement to an area. Recently sold a place called the Famous Door on West Barnett to an individual, excuse me, and he intends to put a restaurant back in it. Well, there's a few issues, like P&Z is an issue. We may have to zone more property than, to make it fit, but he wants to put a soul food restaurant back in the area. His name is Johnny Barreo. He owns he owns Rio Rancho between here and England. So it's something that's in the works. You may see things about it, and if you have any questions, you're welcome to call me.
All right.
Thank y'all.
Thanks, Harvey. Anyone else? All right, if not, then let's move on to item number 2, which is the approval of the minutes of the meeting that we held June the 19th of 2017. I know there was a little bit of change made from one set of emailed minutes to the other, so I trust that these are the ones that were the most recent.
I move we approve the minutes as
I second
presented.
it.
We have a motion and a second for approval. Any discussion?
I just had a quick, what was the change?
They had the names of those that made motions wrong.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't know.
That's the only change that I saw.
Yeah, that's the
between
only
two.
change.
Okay.
I'd asked Cheryl to change it, and she did. It was only that one change.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Any other discussion or questions? If none, all those in favor of approval, raise your right hand. Any opposed, same sign. And that motion carries. All right, let's go on to item number 3. Monthly reports. 3A is the monthly financial report.
Good afternoon. This is the June 2017 financial report. Your beginning cash in your operating fund was $2,301,834. You had income during the month of $263,470, and expenditures of $101,271, leaving you an ending cash balance of $2,464,33. On the following page is the detail of your budget, showing your annual budget, the current month's activity, year-to-date, and your remaining budgets. The following page is your sales tax revenue analysis. Year-to-date over last year, you're at 5.05% over last year and 1.4 over budget. The following page is your capital projects fund. Your opening cash was $1,877,211, had no income. During the month, you had expense of $8,056, leaving you a cash balance of $1,869,155. The following page is the detail of the projects that y'all have allocated in the past and the cash that is still sitting there that has not been expended. And at the bottom is the cash balance of the funds in the River Trail improvement of $975,432. And on the last page is your cash and investments, showing again your cash in both your operating and capital funds budget. funds. And then at the bottom, it shows the allocations of where your funds are located, your cash, your checking account, and your investments. Any
All right.
questions?
One question, I was trying to follow you on the numbers real fast.
Okay.
So you had mentioned about the capital improvement project balance on River Trail of 975. It says
795.
Okay. I
Okay.
thought, wait a minute, maybe
Oh.
I'm
Little
dyslexic
dyslexia
or
kicking in.
something. Anyway, okay,
Thank you.
that was it.
I have one question,
Sure.
just curiosity, is June, I noticed June's, sales tax was kinda down from budget, is that kinda what happens every year this time?
Well, we just kind of estimate what it may be based on previous year, and so it fluctuates depending when people pay.
I got you,
So this next month, you'll see it swinging the other way.
okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, on to item number 3B, which is our projects update.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I've got a few projects to update you guys on. Reuse distribution mains, we are hard at work. We've completed all of the bores. 173 East Main, Shriner University are all complete. We've got about 6,000 linear feet as of the end of at the end of June. Through the golf course, the tennis court area, Marion Drive, and again East Main, focusing a big chunk of effort right now on trying to get through the school zones so we can be the least disruptive as possible once school gets back in session. River Trail West, as we've notified you before, we do have a contract that's executed April of 2017. We're at about 60% design right now. So moving along on that, keep you guys posted, hoping to have that back towards the end of the summer so we can look at construction bids on that. Kerrville Sports Complex, I don't know if you've been out there, it's looking nice and green. It's also looking nice and gray. Got most of the pavement done, most of the pavement painting. So we're really down to punch list. All the buildings are done, except for the DBAT facility, of course. So it's really coming together out there. Tennis center improvements, we have received RFQ back. Council did authorize us to go ahead and negotiate with Schrickle Rollins and Associates for the design and construction services. We're in the negotiation process right now, so working on that scope and moving forward on that. Downtown streetscape, we did have a presentation to City Council on July 11th by Mr. Lewis. He's had some slight modifications since he came before this group, minor in nature, mostly trying to solve some of the drainage issues and pedestrian enhancements really along 16, and has an updated cost estimate. And we'd certainly be happy to bring that back to this group if you guys desire to do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
That would be great.
Sure.
That's good.
And on the tennis center,
Yes, sir.
so are the bids coming in with the dollars that were allocated? Are they going to stay within that as far as you can tell now?
But remember, this is just the RFQ process for the design engineering services. So yes, we do believe we'll be able to get the scope within that design engineering within what we were estimating, which was around that 100 to 150,000 area.
Good.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, how many additional courts are we gonna have in that?
You know, it's going to depend on what the community desires as we go through that feedback process and that stakeholder involvement process. It may be additional courts. It may be enhancing the courts that we have. You know, we just don't know until we go through that stakeholder process.
That was part of the discussion before, though, was to add courts, maybe? Because I thought it was just to repair them, was it not?
Yeah, I think the key part was really just repairing the existing courts as they are. That's what has been contemplated thus far. But certainly, you know, as we've talked about the scope of, as we go through that stakeholder involvement process, a overall master plan for that facility may be beyond the 1.5 million, and it may have to be phased or grants or donations or other things.
EA, I have a question about the streetscapes, and I know you're gonna come back and give us some of the breakouts, which would be helpful, but can you tell us today, like an overall ballpark number?
Yes, ma'am.
That would be helpful. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. And in fact, I think I can go ahead and pass this out to you guys.
52.
This isn't a discussion, full-blown discussion topic for you guys today, certainly, but I did want to, given the budget discussion, wanted to talk
Right.
through that because that was an assignment for Mr. Lewis when he left you guys last time. His latest update basically is about $750,000 for construction, and then he thinks architectural and engineering fees will tack on about another $100,000 to that. So it's right about that range that we had discussed with you guys a few months ago, right at that $325,000.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Any other questions?
In looking
Yes, sir.
at the design, I actually use this downtown parking lot occasionally.
Yes, sir.
And when you come in out of the sun into that thing, I mean, it's a black hole. And you have to turn across traffic that's coming in. When the presentation was made, I was here for that presentation, which was really nice.
Yes, sir.
There was nobly any mention of really improving the lighting in that thing, but I was just curious, have we really looked at that?
We have talked about, Mr. Lewis did talk a little bit about enhancing, particularly on the first floor, where
Yes.
you get more pedestrian traffic than some of the other floors, and it is a little bit lower as far as the where the sun can come into. Subsequent, actually, to his presentation, he's had some discussion with K-Pub potentially, maybe even about enhancing some lighting in
It
there.
is
So
dark.
those discussions, yes, sir, it is recognized, no doubt.
Thank you.
And this isn't the place to ask it, but I'm gonna ask it anyways, because
Yes,
it's
sir.
about the parking garage.
Okay.
Can somebody tell me what or when and why we put in the 2 electric car plugs? When did that occur?
It was a K-Pub infrastructure enhancement. That was part of their programming. I'm not sure, that may have even been before the city took possession of it. I don't know that for
Okay.
sure.
I was just curious.
Yes, sir. I believe that's the only electric charging station in Kerrville that I know of.
Yeah, which is why it was odd when I saw them.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Somebody uses them though. There's a car
They-
that parks it. I
Yes,
know
sir.
that. Is that what it is? Okay.
And that is a pay-for service it's a service
Oh,
charge.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
okay.
not being picked up by K-Pub or the
Yeah,
city.
well.
So, any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, moving on to item number 4, discussion and possible action. 4A is the EIC's annual review and consideration and approval of the KEDC, or Kerr Economic Development Corporation's fulfillment and a grant agreement between us and them in the amount of $180,000. So, Mr. O'Connor, if you've already made it to the podium. I went to look and I'm like, where'd he
So
go?
fast.
So,
I'm just anxious to get up here, Mr. Chairman,
Very
board
good.
members, thank you. Before I get started on our proposed 17-18 budget for the KEDC, I'd like to introduce, I do have 2 board members. I've got Charlie McIlvain and also Don Barnett. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out the better half of KEDC staff is Ms. Teresa Metcalf. And if so inclined, feel free to engage our board or staff in conversations if you have any questions as we go through this. KEDC, I'm going to give you kind of a quick primer on who we are and what we've done currently, starting from current, what our goals are and what our strategies are moving forward. Oh, little delay in this. We're a private nonprofit organization. We really work regionally. I mean, we look at Kerr County and also the city of Kerrville. We think that we actually are more effective with a regional approach rather than just looking, at the city or the county level. I'm very proud of the cooperation that we, seem to get through the KDC board, also EIC and our other stakeholders. We act really as a liaison between business and KDC stakeholders. Now, our services are listed here. We do financial assistance. We work with site selectors. I work with people within the real estate community. We do financial analysis on projects. We are the go-to place for everything economic development, or eventually that is our goal, that they will come to us. We concentrate on primary jobs, and the reason that we concentrate on primary jobs are because we get actually a bigger bang for our buck in terms of doing so. Now, we qualify a primary job as a good or service in which a majority is sold outside the county, and I know that the EIC board is very familiar with this. Our KDC board is a good cross-representation, really, of this community. I mean, we bring all our stakeholders together. We have monthly meetings at a minimum, but I would dare say with this board, they're very actively engaged in projects. Quite often, we're meeting with businesses. We have a myriad of talents of that board, and on an as-needed basis, I'm able to meet with various businesses. Let me give you, for instance, we've been courting a light industrial manufacturer for some time. You know, we have Tom Huddishell, who is with All Plastics, is very well versed in terms of manufacturing background. Tom and I will meet with companies. When we were meeting with Mooney International, Commissioner Mosier was very involved in those negotiations, as well as Don Barnett, to be able to move projects along. So I really see us not as just a two-person staff, but rather a good team, and that includes all our board members as well. Now, we do receive financial assistance from quite a few participants. However, you will see from this pie chart, there is, we get the majority of our funding from the EIC. You know, we do get support from city, county, and also KPUB as well. And this is on an annual contractual basis. We have performance agreements with each of these entities. Some of the projects that we're working on, or that we have worked on and closed out to this point in time, is Fox Tank. This, as you will recall, this board was very empathetic of the Fox Tank situation. They were dealing within a very tumultuous industry and so forth. They brought the president of the company before the board. We were able to renegotiate some things, and I'm pleased to say that that workforce has not only exceeded 90, which is the contractual threshold that had to be met, but they currently have a workforce of 108. Now, all of our projects receive an economic impact analysis. We use a firm out of the Austin area, and they had projected that the 10-year economic impact from this company is over $2 million. So I applaud the EIC for working with that property owner. Another project that was completed, frankly, by my predecessors is the James Avery Craftsman Center, that 53,000 square foot structure that was built out there. The 10-year economic impact on that project is close to $18 million to this community. And I would dare say, I think all of us in this room have high hopes for future expansions of that company along the Highway 27 corridor.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
The analysis, when you, before a Fox Tank or somebody comes in, do you follow up is there a way to follow up, say, every 2 or 3 years to see, you know, within that 10-year time frame, as far as revenues generated, things like that, is there a way to keep up with that?
Whether or not they've fulfilled the promise or met expectation, yes, we will end up doing that. We haven't done so with either of these projects at this point in time. They're a little bit too new. I mean, James Avery is still finishing up the work. On the back of the Craftsman Center, the wellness type structures where it's partitioned down to the river so that the workers can have a place to have a little recreation and a place to have lunch and so forth. So there's still some ongoing construction there. With Fox Tank, they've just hit their numbers, and but we do track that on a monthly basis. I get reports from them, and that also is shared with the city as well.
Thank you.
In terms of our current assets, currently we have a checking account balance of slightly over $149,000. We have projected net income at the end of the fiscal year at slightly over $60,000. That'll give us a projected checking account balance of a little bit over $89,000, $89,501.74. It's simply the difference between the $149,000 and the $60,000. We did have net income of almost $100,000 as of the close of 2016-17, and with those expenses that we projected out to the end of the year, which was almost a little bit over $39,000, that's how we got the $60,000 figure. Now, how did we achieve savings? Well, some of it was, there was a little bit of a gap. Frankly, we had an executive director who left 3 pay periods prior to my arrival, so there was some savings there. We have a pay differential between the former administrative staff and current administrative staff. And also, frankly, travel, conferences, training, all those things of that nature. I didn't see any point upon my arrival in terms of getting out there to conferences and so forth. I've been doing this work for 25 years. I know the importance of being out there and active outside of the community, but also we saw that there was a bit of groundwork that still needed to be done internally. So I've kind of staved off any kind of travel until this next fiscal year. Now, with the current SWOT analysis, what I see as really our strengths, and I think I've shared this with the EIC board the last time I made a presentation to you, but I think our board composition is one of our strongest assets. The partnership network, while it can be a little bit hard to juggle and so forth, I think it's very effective that we have all the input that we do from our various stakeholders. We do have a lot of available property. We have property within the airport, and I'm going to reference some of the boards that are right in front of you. My apologies. I know it's a little bit hard to see, but we had identified easily 6 pad sites that have infrastructure to them that can be developed. Now, it's within the airport, so it has to be something aviation related. But we see it's a recruitment tool for people who do avionics, painting and upholstery, and turbine repair. Now, we have gone out and actually tried to bring some others in. We had these boards put together for a nominal fee through Schreiner University. We're trying to save every penny that we can. But we need to do more of this because this is really an effective tool. In terms of our weaknesses, and we do have some, frankly, I think first and foremost is our communication with our stakeholders. What our mission is, what we would like to get I think accomplished each year has to be better conveyed on our part. And I think also we need to meet more often with those stakeholders and get some input to see what their goals and objectives are as well. It's important that we all be on the same page with this. Our website and branding, typically I'm not a real big advocate of this, but we live in a digital age and it's very important that we be competitive with other communities. Typically, the first look anybody will take at our community is through our website. I've had to redo it internally. We have a branding and messaging workshop tomorrow, and as soon as we get that worked out with the KDC board, we're going to relaunch probably next month. We have done this in-house. Thankfully, we have very talented staff, all to the tune of about $50. I'm sorry, I think it's $58, so.
Well done.
Marketing, I think I've shared with you previously. Who is Kerrville and even who is the KDC? We didn't have very strong messaging. We had to create some quality of life brochures. We had to create some craft agricultural marketing pieces and so forth. And we've done that all in-house. So all that we're going to end up paying is the printing cost to be able to do that. So I believe that we are doing more actually with less. In terms of the opportunities, well, and I'll get into this a little bit more in just a moment, but light manufacturing, I still see Mooney International, I'll speak to this in a bit, as a very strong prospect. The Airport Business Park, that references those 6 pad sites that we have over there with utilities. James Avery, I have very high hopes for future expansion along Highway 27, and we're keeping an eye on that. And then the Craft Agricultural Production Committee that we have formed, which is not only looking at the retail aspects of agriculture, wine and olives and coffee and things like that, but also the production side as well. Typically, my predecessors had worked on this and they had identified the Highway 173 corridor as a prime corridor for that type development. Our threats, we don't have shovel-ready sites very much. We've got the property over at Peterson Farm Road. There's 86 acres. It doesn't have utilities. We do have utilities to the 6 sites that I referenced over at the airport, but also even the Airport Commerce Park property, we have some utilities and roadway issues. So there's some challenges there. In terms of financial incentives, well, currently, I mean, we offer incentives through 380 agreements. Typically, we will give grants, and we also give tax abatement. I have talked to this board before about the need to be able to expand our economic development toolkit, and I will get into that in a little moment. So the opportunities. We have been courting a international light manufacturing company that has been going through a rapid growth mode. They are looking to consolidate, and we are among just a handful of communities that they are taking a look at. The numbers, I have not seen firm numbers on this. It's very preliminary, but we're looking at potentially anywhere from a light manufacturing facility of, let's say, 100 to 150,000 square feet and up, and we're looking at a potential workforce of 150 to 200 who would come here. This would be light assembly. We have met with them most recently. They came to town on Saturday. I would dare say I think that they have been very impressed with Kerrville. They have met with the board on various occasions, and we're hoping that they will make a favorable decision by the end of August. So we continue to show them the love, so to speak. Mooney International, we had gotten very far with Mooney in terms of negotiations and future plans for that company until they changed leadership. We are kind of in a wait-and-see mode. However, my board is ready to pounce. As soon as a new CEO is announced, we will be over there trying to resume discussions with them. The Airport Business Park, we have been in an active recruitment mode for that. I would dare say once Mooney does come back to the table, that they can actually help make some inroads for us to be able to make some connections with some of the aviation-related businesses. James Avery, once again, we're just kind of watching. They're going through the renovations of the Harper Road complex, probably about $5 million in terms of renovations at that point. We'll resume discussions regarding the Highway 27 property as soon as they're complete with those. And then the craft agricultural production. We are working through the TEABC through various issues, and we're slowly but surely getting there. In terms of the short-term economic goals that we have, well, as I mentioned, we're rebranding ourselves and we're relaunching, and we'll do so next month. Like I said, we have a workshop tomorrow. One of the things that we need to do is we need to build in demographic data, typically ESRI data, which is the industry standard for demographic information within our website, and also we need to have a property search function, which we currently don't have. Granted, our previous website, we didn't even have any means in which a prospective business or a site selector could actually end up making any kind of detailed request to us, so we were not very competitive. You will see in your packets this on Hutto. There are communities right now that are doing a lot of spec building. They're working with site selectors to be able to market their communities. One of my predecessors, Ray Watson, is actually a site selector. And he agrees. He says we need to be more competitive. We need to be reaching out to these folks. And we need to prepare marketing kits of this type caliber if we're going to attract people's attention. We have the financial incentives that other communities do. We also have quite a few available properties that quite a few other communities don't. We just don't really have a good outreach strategy, and that's something that we're changing. I am proposing to come back, and I will get to this in a little bit more detail in a moment, but to put together a spec building and or also a build-to-suit construction plan. It's one of the quivers in our economic development arsenal that we are very much losing or missing. Case in point, we had a firm called Triangle Pump a few years ago, back in 2013, was very interested in Kerrville. The only problem was we didn't have any building inventory. We do have some shovel-ready sites, but some companies need to go and they need to go fast. We lost them to Claiborne, and but they were able to give us feedback and said, were it not for the lack of property or building inventory, they would have come here. That seems to be a reoccurring theme that we need to address. Long-term goals, I will be coming back in 30 days, not only with that plan, but hopefully contained within that plan will be a project in terms of how we can end up doing this moving forward. Whether or not we're putting in the infrastructure, whether or not we're actually constructing and subsidizing that. Maybe we're working with a developer to cover some of his carrying cost until he can lease up or possibly even sell the facility. But that will all be part of the plan. Now, with that $89,000 that we have been able to set aside in a bank account, what we are proposing to do is to commit over $69,000 into a capital fund. And this would be specifically for pre-construction and construction activities. Pre-construction in the sense of doing survey work, environmental testing, maybe an appraisal, working with an engineering firm to come up with cost estimates. That type work has to be done almost negotiated at the table. And to have funds available to be able to do so, I think puts us in a much better competitive position. In terms of any kind of construction, granted, if we were to cover the infrastructure cost or actually provide subsidized financing, or the construction of a building would be subject to a 380 agreement that we would end up becoming before the EIC for support, and ultimately with the city and county as well. 20,000 of that 89,000 reserve, we are proposing to simply keep into a checking account as a contingency fund. And that will be primarily for the pre-construction activities.
So are you segregating the capital fund to where it can only be used for certain things?
Yeah, specifically, and that'll be part of the plan. I think we have to have a laser focus on this type work, and this will only be, I don't know if I'm going to be a huge proponent of spec or built to suit. I do need to sit with some developers and find out what their market is currently for risk, but I will come back and be very specific as to how those funds should be used. So our proposed budget, we are proposing a budget of still the same budget as last year without any change, $256,000. There's a breakout of our various stakeholders and the commitment that they had made last year to this organization. Our expenses, granted, I anticipate additional bump in some of the expenses only because I will have to buy the ESRI data, you know. I did the website for cheap, but in terms of having data available at our fingertips and a reliable source, that's going to cost us a little bit of money. I do have a proposal from a company. It'd be $2,500 a year with a 3-year commitment. This is a software program that's used by a lot of municipalities and also utility companies as well. So we're still kind of vetting that vendor, but I think it's going to be an effective tool. I will have to put together marketing kits of this nature here, plus what I had shown you on with the city of Hutto. We need more of that. I need a really kind of a calling card that says who we are as a community and give businesses reasons why they should be here. Currently, those tools are somewhat lacking. And what I will direct you to then, I have provided also the trifold sheet, which shows our budget, proposed budget, and also kind of a historically what KDC's funding has been since 2012, 2013. I've highlighted the areas where it has changed from last year. I have also attached a sheet of budgeted notes on here with, I think, a fair level of specificity as to what I plan on using. A lot of our costs, frankly, are very fixed here in terms of payroll, legal, accounting services, what our rent are, things of that nature. Does the board have any questions? Please.
Do you work with the Chamber of Commerce on marketing?
We haven't. We actually work quite well with the chamber, though. We also work with the CVB very well. Actually, the chamber is my landlord, in case you didn't know. Also, Walt Koenig is also a board member. We are currently working on something in terms of trying to assess the training needs within our community. Not only, and I had presented this to the EIC board before, we need to really assess what the training needs of our businesses in this community. Hopefully we can form some kind of training consortium if we can identify those common threads throughout our community. I then want Alamo colleges to come into this community more often and train our folks right here within this community as opposed to running down towards San Antonio. I think that there's enough demand here. We have put through the chamber a survey out on business, SurveyMonkey at this point in time. I can't tell you what the response rate is, but the chamber's got a membership of close to 900. So we're hoping for some significant numbers on this.
What do other cities do as far as funding economic development? Do some cities do it directly through their own budget, or do they all go, that you have experience with, go through an economic improvement corporation like we have?
Ours is a little unique just in terms of the structure of it. Typically, the 4B sales tax may accrue to the Economic Development Corporation directly. Quite often, though, economic development is performed as a function of the city or maybe even the county through, say, an intergovernmental agreement. Like I said, ours is a little convoluted, but it works. And like I said, I think the problem, if there has been a problem previously, it's only been in the communication between staff and the various stakeholders. And I hold myself responsible for that as well.
I got a couple of questions. One,
Sure.
What's the logic behind having an unbalanced budget with a reserve fund?
Well, just to show you what I project our operating expenses are likely to be. I could have shown that as a zero, but you're right. I can take it from the reserve, so it'd be the $89,000 minus the $4,500.
Because kind of to the discussion you guys just had about the convoluted part, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the idea of KDC being the one that's holding the reserve instead of, say, EIC. As far as this, I guess it's for spec building. Is that essentially what this?
Well, it can be
something like that, though.
Well, but it can also be for infrastructure cost as well.
Right.
I mean,
so that's where that's actually where I'm going. So basically, my question is, what is the reasoning behind, if you're fully funded by these other entities, EIC being one of them, why would we fund a reserve fund when it would seem like it would make more sense to just, we do our function of the funding and you do your function of the recruiting. You know what I'm saying?
Well, one, it gives KDC staff the ability to be able to negotiate deals with some level of confidence, knowing that they do have some reserve funds to be able to commit to a project. EIC funding is, there's a lot of competition for those funds, I mean, from year to year. This also gives us the funding necessary to be able to implement a plan. Like I said, up to this point in time, we haven't had a clearly articulated spec or built-to-suit plan, but I need to change that. But that's something that we will hopefully financially support going forward. The other thing is in terms of working with developers, like I said, the ability to be able to pick up the environmental expense, maybe survey and so forth, and to negotiate from a position of strength is really invaluable in terms of putting these things together. Now, no, once it gets to huge projects, we're putting in the infrastructure, we're constructing buildings and so forth, that would undoubtedly end up coming back to all our stakeholders, but that will be fully represented in the plan as well. Frankly, if we were to do this, you know, we would also need more money than what we currently have in reserve at this point in time. We had, my predecessors had looked at what it might cost to build a 20,000 square foot spec building. That's coming in at least at over $400,000. Now granted, we do not need to amass that kind of funding to participate in spec building construction or built to suit, you know, but like I said, that'll be fully developed throughout the plan.
So okay, so, I mean.
It's
maybe
expediency.
Okay, but it's also layering, is it not? I mean, the actual funds are coming out of the city from sales tax. We're going through the EIC and going to KEDC. Is that the actual most efficient way of utilizing these funds? I mean, I know I'm new to EIC, but
well,
you see what I'm saying? You know what I'm asking?
I completely understand your point. I also think it's an incentive to the KDC to be very prudent, fiscally prudent, about the funds that they've been given. I mean, we are very purposely trying to amass enough funds to be able to do this. You know, like I said, it's a function of time. Time is competition. So especially in terms of doing projects.
So would you say that of that money that is set aside, and it's part of the question that I had earlier, you know, you're going to have a specific use for those funds. Is it for the time constraint that you see that we have? I mean, what's it going to cost to get a set of plans put together and the engineering put together for a particular site that you want to put one of these buildings on? Is it going to eat up that money? I mean, you're not talking about buying $60,000 worth of land.
No, it's like I said, there's a lot of property that's been out on the market for many years. We need to do something a little differently. These funds are actually to begin to kind of prime the pump, to kind of get developers' interest and people to do either things on a spec basis. You know, if I can move a project along by agreeing to do the environmental testing or some engineering on the site, that really speaks volumes. You know, I don't know whether or not this is going to be enough money. It definitely will not be enough money to be able to construct a spec building should the KEDC look at doing this all their own. However, I'm very much looking at leveraging other people's investments. So I don't want to speculate at this time in terms of how much money will be needed, but if I do identify that there is a market for 20,000 square foot spec buildings and it's going to cost anywhere from $1.15 to $1.25, yeah, that's going to put us in excess of $400,000. And look, I'm not asking to amass that kind of money and so forth. I just need some money to be able to move projects a little bit more expediently.
Ryan, how do you foresee that fund changing or not changing from year to year with each new budget cycle?
It's a good question. In terms of, when I look at it historically in terms of our operating budget, I mean, it's really gone in cycles. I mean, it's been very high, very low, and so forth. Over the last 2 years, it's been very steady in terms of what our expenses are. But in terms of future need, doing spec, marketing, websites, business outreach, I see that there's frankly a lot of work there. I can well imagine that we will end up using up any kind of reserve, I would hope, over the next year. Granted, I fully anticipate that hopefully we can recover some of those costs, especially on the spec building side. I don't mind that our investment maybe go into a project to get it started. I'd like to see if possible if we can actually recover those funds and continue to roll those over into other projects. This really is just seed money that we're looking at. Like I said, as I develop the spec building or built-to-suit plan, I'll bring that back before the EIC. It may require that I reach out not only to the EIC, but also our other stakeholders for additional funding to do this.
Okay,
But
so let me just make sure I understand kind of what you're talking about specifically with regard to the fund that we've been discussing for the last several minutes. And that would be that, as I'm hearing it, you said we would probably use every bit of money that we have regardless. But if you've got a certain amount of money, 20,000, whatever it is in this fund, to be used for certain types of things that you mentioned earlier as sort of incentives or priming the pump, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then it's not fully used. Do you anticipate holding that in that fund and then just sort of backfilling back up to that same level, a lesser amount in the following year, if you get my drift?
Yeah, I understand. I think we would have to come back to all our stakeholders. Any residual funds would be returned or could be returned on a pro rata basis, But I fully expect, look, I see this as an investment. These are dollars that I'm investing. I definitely expect a return on investment on this. I don't think it's a lot. We're pooling a lot of monies to be able to work more quickly and move projects along. But we're at the will of our stakeholders to receive any residual funds back. I think the board would be more than happy to do that, KDC board.
Brian, I have some questions on the financial statement.
Yeah.
You're on the accrual basis. How does that compare to the cash basis accounting? You've got a profit through July 17th, for only a couple more months in the 16-17 fiscal year. You've got a net income of $99,000. Yet on your budget proposal, you propose that, or you assume that you're going to lose $1,590. Are you going to have that many more expenses in the last 2 months of the year? I don't quite understand that.
Do you know what?
How does the accrual basis financial stack up with the cash basis financial? And the other question I have, this other income that you've got of 24.5, who is the originator of that?
I think that's K-pop. I think that's
K-pub's on there. K-pub's on there. I'm talking about the other income.
Yeah, I think it's a zero. It's this one here. It's zero. It's
Oh, okay.
dash, yeah.
But I don't quite understand how you're gonna come up with where you've got 99,000 as of July profit, and you're gonna have a loss of $1,590. We went through this before with your predecessor, and we really never got an answer to it. I'm certainly not opposed to funding this, but I sure would like a clarification on the
Yeah, no, I
on the
understand.
financials. And I'm not picking on you because I'm a CPA. I'm just picking on you because
You know what?
I
It's
want
a
to
very
see the
valid
numbers.
question. Do you know?
For the fiscal year 16-17, that was what was put together from our predecessors. And that was assuming that everything that they had budgeted for would end up being a deficit of $1,500.
What I would like to see is what your, a forecast of what your expenses are gonna be the remainder of the fiscal year, 16, 17.
And that was on a previous slide.
Do we have that in our packet, do you know?
I don't believe that's printed out in your packet.
Is that the 39?
I don't see it in the packet. And I'm also interested in what the cash basis looks like.
Yeah, our projected expenses were, throughout the end of the year, were, let's see, $39,515.95. Which is where how we came up with a projected year-end balance of $60,446.05.
Well,
As part of the presentation, that's slide number 7.
that still doesn't answer my question. You've got a net income on your financial statement of 99,000 plus. And you've got a forecast for that same period as a loss of $1,590. Are you telling us that this is going to be, you're gonna have expenses in excess of $100,000 for the next 2 months? And what are they?
I'm going to have to go back and revisit that, Commissioner. Our projected expenses for the end of the current fiscal year is the $39,000 figure.
Mr. President, I would like to see, before we proceed on this, some other figures. I'd also like to see the cash basis financial statement.
Okay. May I ask, what is our time frame with regard to getting budget working, EA?
Well, I believe that the county K-Pub, I think everybody's in the throes of budget discussions at this point in time. We can notify our stakeholders and let them know of when we can possibly return with a proposed budget.
Okay. So do we have time for that? I know this has more steps to go, and it's part of our overall budget.
Yes, sir.
for
Your next
EIC.
agenda item is the overall EIC budget, and that's an item for review and discussion tonight. We'll be bringing you back, based off of your input, another formal budget on the August meeting for your approval, so we certainly can.
So we could iron out some of these details in between now and the next meeting.
Yes, sir, if that's your desire.
And again,
Yeah.
That'll work.
From the city's perspective, I can't speak for KDC, but from the city, that's fine.
I mean, so we have here what looks like in your trifold sheet, I'm assuming those are the budget numbers for 16, 17, so if we could keep the budget numbers, but then have a column in addition to what Jim's asking for, but also have a column that shows actuals, well, I mean, projected actuals, 10 plus 2, or
Okay.
whatever it is. That would be helpful to be able to compare to the budget versus the upcoming proposed budget.
Okay. Yeah, it will certainly do that.
That sounds logical.
okay,
Can I just make one comment?
sure.
Regarding this idea of speculative building?
Mm-hmm.
I spent a whole career in the speculation business. And just, I believe, and correct me, I may be 100% wrong, but the building we're in now, to my understanding, hasn't been paid for completely because we're trying to sell some property, the original, to pay for this, if that's my
I have
understanding.
no idea.
I believe, and I guess that, that water and sewer are going to pay down the debt or pay it for this facility. I guess what I'm trying to say is, we've got to be careful, just the whole principle of speculative building, okay? And because great ideas, but you know, we have to represent the taxpayers and make sure that they're protected in any type of project we get into.
Yeah, it's, I mean, like I said, I think we are good stewards of taxpayer dollars in terms of being on a spec basis. It's a little bit of a gamble. We're going to mitigate risk as much as possible with this, and that's why we'll end up doing this through partnerships. It'll be a public-private partnership, and undoubtedly we won't end up doing it alone. So,
Thank you.
All right. Any more questions? So if you could add the existing forecasted year-end numbers against the budget for the 16-17 and bring that back to us at our next meeting.
okay.
We will give consideration.
Thank you for your consideration. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, let's move on to item 4B, which is the look at our budget for fiscal year 2018.
Good afternoon again. Okay, we are looking at the overall Kerrville Economic Improvement Corporation fiscal year 2018 budget. As you can see, this budget allocates $4,799,000 and some change for the overall revenue on the budget. Revenue projections are at $3,476,000. This budget does contemplate a planned drawdown of reserves of $1,307,000 and some change due to several of the obligations and funding agreements which the EIC and City Council have already approved. Fiscal year 2017, as you know, has a budget projected with an unrestricted fund balance of $2.2 million. The fiscal year 18 budget does allocate expenditures in 4 major categories: administrative, and then the 3 traditional categories: business development, quality of life, and public infrastructure. And as you'll see as we go through these details, it is a very public infrastructure-oriented budget with some set-asides as previously per policy direction of previous EIC. The allocations have tentatively been drafted as in the following categories: administrative, $1,599,000; business development, $500,000 economic development set aside; quality of life, $950,000, and there's 2 detailed components to that, and then public infrastructure of $1,750,000. Now, I will say that public infrastructure at $1,750,000 is slightly misleading because I do want to talk about a component that we've added into the administrative side in regards to debt service, which makes this budget even more public infrastructure intensive than that $1,750,000 does indicate. So I'm going to click back up to the administrative component to it. On the detail piece of that allocates local meetings and workshops at $500. 2 debt service components, Series 2011A for River Trail and Series 2012 for River Trail, that's $259,890, $253,413. There's also a debt service component for the athletic complex, Series 2015, $605,350. Now again, as I mentioned before, this does have a debt service component for Legion Lift Station. As we've talked about before in earlier meetings, Legion Lift Station has a direct economic impact, particularly amongst several of the areas that Mr. O'Connor was speaking about. In that main corridor, we have seen, and I believe this group maybe has even seen several projects come forward that maybe have not been able to get over the goal line because of infrastructure challenges. We are basically topped out as far as the capacity on Legion Lift Station. And so what we've contemplated within this is allocating it within the debt service component within the administrative piece, rather than utilizing some of the other set-asides, such as the economic development set-aside, which would take a big chunk of that. So it does contemplate $5 million worth of overall CO debt service for Legion Lift Station, but that is allocated debt service over, I believe, is it 20-year debt service? Yeah, 20-year debt service. It's a partial payment in fiscal year 18, and that $200,000 there, we would sell that debt usually in the January timeframe is when we're seeing our best rate recovery there, and then it would be the $400,000 for the 19 years out from that.
So that's not a project, though, that you guys have already asked for funding on?
It is not a project we have asked for funding on. City Council has authorized the city to go ahead and move forward. We're well, not halfway through, but we're about a quarter way through the engineering on that project. We anticipate that the engineering will be back spring 2018 timeframe, and then we'll be bidding that project in late spring, early summer timeframe, with the hope that we might be able to be under construction by the end of the fiscal year. So this contemplates a pre-funding of that project, recognizing the need that essentially we don't have any ability for anything new to go in that basin, and it's a very critical basin because it does have a large quadrant of our greenfield area.
So we're pretty well banking on Legion Lift Station being at least this amount funded through EIC?
Yes, sir. This budget does contemplate that. That's correct. We don't anticipate that it will fully allocate that amount. We think we'll be able to also utilize some project savings within the water sewer fund to make up that balance. But it does contemplate a $5 million chunk of what we anticipate to be somewhere around $7 million for the total project, excluding engineering.
But this is not a new issue of bonds or anything. This is, you're just asking for funding from EIC?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's
Cool.
correct.
And
Yes,
so,
sir. They're EIC backed bonds.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
But it is a new $5 million bond issue?
Yes, sir.
That's what I was asking you.
Yes, sir. That's correct. It
and
would be a new
so
series.
how this relates to economic development is that if we add more capacity to that sewage line in some of the areas we're talking about here, it won't happen.
That's correct.
So basically what you're saying, we're tapped
Yes,
out
sir.
as far as.
The way that Kerrville essentially funds infrastructure in that manner, that we don't have impact fees, and so infrastructure, as we've talked about before, is a key component of economic development. And without that capacity, we will not be able to. You won't have any new rooftops, whether that's commercial or residential, in that corridor.
And that's also in the Singing Winds area too, right?
Yes, sir. I believe
Yeah.
Singing Winds is in that. Basically, we've had several multifamily complexes
Yeah.
come in the last 12 months or so that have topped out the remainder of that capacity. In fact, we've got several large developments that are going in right now that are having to, on their own dime, basically try to tap into other basins, and are fortunate in that they're close enough that they're able to basically create a temporary fix until we're able.
Is that the Shriner
Yes, sir.
University
That's
stuff?
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've got about a $300,000 expense that they're having to ensue because we don't have capacity.
Can we talk about these things are we talking about these items as we go through?
Can.
Okay, I'd like to.
Sure.
Yeah, so my original understanding of this project was that EIC was going to fund the $3 million for the distribution lines, and I don't recall, not to say that it wasn't, the subject wasn't raised prior about Legion Lift Station and the possibility of funding debt through EIC. I do know that historically we try to take a look at the administrative cost, which includes these debt service items, as a percentage of our total revenue. And in the past, we've looked at not exceeding 40%. That's kind of been our warning sign. And this would definitely put us up above that. It would put us at 45.8% and then 49% the following year. Still up in between 45 and 50%, moving out. So
Now, is that the overall administrative or just the debt service component?
overall administrative is what we've looked at before.
Okay.
So I just wanted to raise the issue again for this board as we consider maybe the best way to do this, if we're able to do this.
Is that an accepted practice, or is that a policy that you guys have?
It was just something that when we started taking on debt service, we decided that we needed to limit ourselves. Otherwise, there's no need to ever have this board because you
Right.
won't ever fund anything but debt service.
Because I think if I'm not mistaken, legally, you can go up to 50% with your debt service of your overall, I believe.
I think that's right.
Okay, just,
And we kind of
so
stuck
I mean, you
it
got
at
that
40.
as a major
Yeah.
mark, right?
Yeah, so I mean, this would bump us up
Close.
really close to
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So
Well,
to me, it's just something that needs to be on the table and discussed.
Yeah, and again, there is a distinction there between the overall administrative and the debt service
Which
component.
I understand that.
Yes,
yeah.
ma'am.
Historically, we've just talked about the overall number.
Okay.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'd just be handling debt service.
Right.
Would you like me to carry on with business development?
Let me
Okay.
ask you one
Yes, sir.
question. I gotta wrap my hands around this, my head. If a developer came in and said, I want to, build a project, but, the road from wherever to our property is not a good road, and we need a 4-lane turns, whatever. Does that fall under the Economic Improvement Corporation ability to fund?
Certainly, the EIC has the ability to do that, to help defer infrastructure costs for individual employers that could come in or businesses that could come in. I think the distinction here is that a line extension versus a capacity extension for an entire basin. And we do certainly have a policy within the city that as those individuals come in or properties are annexed, that they are responsible for extending the lines. Now, if there are properties, if they were at the end of a line per se, and there are properties that could receive service in between, we'd have to look at some type of pro rata agreement. But I think the distinction with the lift station is that it is overall capacity for that basin, not just an individual provider. What you run into in that situation where you're increasing the overall capacity is that you're asking basically the last person to come in. You've got a certain amount of capacity that's already been pre-bought, so to speak, by the community. And so then it is being taken up by other smaller projects. And then when that capacity is up, the next mover would have to pay for arguably capacity beyond what they would need specifically.
I guess the issue I have is where is it a function of the city as opposed to a function of the EIC? I've had a lot of discussions with the people in Austin about this, and I'm beginning to ask now, is there anything the EIC can't do?
Yeah, well, economic development is a function of both the city and the EIC. EIC plays a big component for economic development within the city of Kerrville.
And I agree with that. I just wonder if this is considered economic development. In other words, if the city were to grow on its own and just needed more capacity for any other reason, nobody's coming in, just natural growth, does that fall under the EIC, in your opinion?
In my opinion, growth in general is economic development, and I think but for this project and but for providing this capacity, we would not see additional new tax revenues, which is a primary goal of the EIC.
Thank you.
But that's certainly for the policy directors to decide.
All right.
Okay.
Any other questions in that administrative item? All right, let's move on to business development.
Business development, this does continue to allocate the $500,000 towards your economic development set aside. At the end of year, you will have $1.5 million within that economic development side. That's the end of fiscal year 17. So certainly that contemplates if that's just moved over next year at the end of fiscal year 18, you will have $2 million within that economic development set aside.
All right, can you, I think I know mostly what that's about because I was part of why we developed that. But explain what that means, set aside, what that could be used for.
So that is simply a designated fund that was created per the policy directive of the EIC. As you said, you probably know more on the details of that than I do, but it is a designated fund that the EIC has been socking away for. This will be going on 3 years, including this fiscal year, 4 years for next one.
And there might be a project at some point that would request funding that we would use that for.
Simply a war chest for economic development purposes and negotiations.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Quality of life, category 2, you do have an obligation. The second component of the $750,000 for the tennis center, that original $750,000 has been shifted over into capital project fund. And as we talked about before, we're in the negotiation process. Once that engineering work comes out, there'll still be an approval process for the actual construction bid. But that additional $750,000 is contemplated to be moved over at some point during fiscal year 18. This also does have a $200,000 allocated towards downtown streetscape enhancements. There's $315,000 from previous fiscal year and EIC budgets that have been shifted towards that capital project fund. You have $250,000 right now allocated within your fiscal year 17 budget. based off of your direction, we're assuming that you want to continue to move that over into that capital project fund, which will give you approximately $565,000. And we contemplated an additional $200,000. In previous budgets, you had $120 that was allocated there. We raised that to $200,000 to get you to approximately that $750,000 mark that you had directed us here a couple months ago. But we can shift that to whatever you'd like there. That brings that total quality of life category for next fiscal year to $950,000.
All right, so on the downtown streetscapes budget that was just handed out, we're about another $100,000 short.
Yes, sir, with the architectural and engineering fees, that's correct. We just didn't want to be.
Who needs them? I'm kidding.
We're with you. We build stuff.
Keep in mind that budget
It's
hasn't
actually a
been
couple of hundred
approved
thousand.
as like
Yeah. It
fall is
hasn't?
gonna be
What's that?
done.
Isn't it a couple
So
of
Correct.
thousand
It's still a
additional?
checklist item.
That's why you have that.
It is.
There is $200,000 that is right now contemplated within your budget. That will bring your total project budget to $750,000. Again, that is slightly short from the latest estimate from Mr. Lewis. Again, that's an architect's estimate. I mean, we don't have engineers or an engineer's estimate to this point, but like I said, we just didn't want to be presumptive beyond the, you guys there was some consensus around $750,000 a couple months ago, and so we just didn't want to be presumptive beyond that. If you'd like to adjust that, we certainly can.
So EA, thank you for giving us this earlier. Without going through it in its entirety, I know that you had talked about the $315,000 that was originally budgeted. We've spent $46,000 to date. So, does that take that into account? Or are we going to fall short of that 45? Need an additional
$315 remaining right now. That's the current balance. So.
Expenses to date of $45,946 for the projected cash balance of $269,154.
But I believe the end of year cash balance projection is $300,000.
So we haven't, even though it says expenses to date of $46,000, we haven't really spent them? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, ma'am, those have been expended. What I'm saying is that your end of year balance is projected to be $315,000.
Okay, got it.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And that
I
is,
thought that was the amount funded.
yeah, and that
so-
is, and just so you know, what we had done, we've consolidated several of the smaller other project features. There was the fountain and some other pieces, and so we've just kind of put that all together into downtown
Lumped it into
streetscape.
one.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Just for simplicity of that project has kind of consolidated around what Mr. Lewis presented a couple months ago.
All right. Any other questions on any of the quality of life items?
So would you like us to keep that at 200,000, or do you want us to adjust that up or down?
I don't know. What do you guys
I
think?
think 200,000, leave it.
Leave it.
It's still gonna be 100,000 short,
It
even
is.
if we put in the
More.
200,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, again, that is an item that if council decides to move forward with a funding agreement, and we go through the design engineering process, we'll have better estimates at that time. We can continue to have that conversation. Again, I don't think it's something that we would probably have construction bid project till maybe summer, at the earliest of next year.
You're not locked into that number anyway, are you?
No, sir. Again, this is just an architect
That's
estimate. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay. Category 3, public infrastructure. You've got 500,000 currently allocated within this fiscal year. There was 100,000 that was allocated from last year that has moved over to that capital fund project. So at the end of the year, this fiscal year, you will have 600,000 in that set aside for public housing. Reuse distribution lines, again, as we've talked about before, 1.5 million within the funding agreement was dedicated for this fiscal year, 1.5 million obligated for next fiscal year. Skipping back up to the public housing component, as you can see, previously the EIC had provided kind of this every other year $500,000 direction. What we've done just for ease of budgeting, we've just smoothed that out to 250,000 every fiscal year. Certainly, we can adjust that however you guys would like us to.
And this is an accumulation fund for a public housing project that might come in the future?
Yes, sir, that's correct. It was just based off of previous policy direction on EIC directing staff
Is
to
there anything
allocate.
concrete on that?
No.
It's gonna be done, or is that just surmise it might be done?
No, sir. My understanding is that was simply set aside for public housing.
Is there a
page that shows what's unencumbered that's building up in these accounts?
Yes,
Okay, what page? I missed it. Sorry. Then.
14?
page 14.
Thank you. Thank you. That's just for this year. I'm talking about, I don't see it cumulative. Is it? Maybe I'm missing something.
Should be.
Okay, I see, okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's for housing, if I'm looking at the right page, it has,
It's 100,000 in addition to the 500,000 at the end of this fiscal year, assuming something doesn't come up in the next couple months, we'll bring your total to 600,000.
It just hasn't been moved over yet.
That's correct.
It's not spent, it's just going into the fund.
I understand, but I'm looking for a total, cumulative total, if it's, it
Total
should be-
cumulative is 100,000.
That's for the year, right?
That's from previous years.
I thought you said you were doing 500,000.
That's what's in this fiscal year, yes, sir.
Okay, so,
So that 500,000 has not been moved
okay, so
yet.
it'll be 600.
Yes, sir,
Okay.
at the end of the year.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So that public infrastructure component, just on the cash basis, brings it to 1,750,000. Again, arguably you could add that 200,000 from the administrative component of the debt sale for Legion Lift Station, bringing your public infrastructure overall emphasis to almost $2 million, which is a very strong emphasis, certainly. That brings your total expenditures to $4,799,000 some change. Again, net revenues to expenditure, it's a drawdown of your fund balance of approximately $1.3 million, leaving you a cash balance of $951,000. Be happy to answer any questions you may have. Or receive any direction you may have.
Yeah, I got some questions, I guess. Just a couple.
Sure.
One you already answered, I guess, but the stated purpose of this ED set aside isn't one, right? It's just a rainy day fund? Is that essentially what we're doing?
It's more of an economic development war chest for you to be able to utilize that as a.
But no specific project behind it, it's just,
No, sir. It's
Okay.
to have the cash
I'm
on
giving
hand.
the origination of that.
okay.
At one point, the city did created a blue ribbon panel to study what economic development project might be something that this city should emphasize, and at that time, it was decided that we needed to look at a convention center.
Okay.
And so we started a while back of setting aside a little bit of money with anticipation of a convention center being funded. And we didn't accumulate it at that point. We just reserved it for that year's budget. That did not happen, of course.
Yeah.
And so it's been accumulated since for, a project similar to that, or a project that, that's kind of how it started. Now it's kind of set aside for economic development purposes for
Okay.
a big project that comes along that we could help out without having to go into debt or.
Okay, so it kind of goes to what I was asking about KEDC, is the same sort of thing. What's the logic behind deficit spending here when we have a set aside that isn't earmarked for anything? What's the purpose of that? And throw into that with a question I have, which I'm not actually sure of the validity of it. Okay, it's just I'm gonna throw it out here. But in the articles and the bylaws of EIC, it says something about if all the expenses, bonds, and whatnot are covered, the extra net earnings are supposed to go to the city. So how do we reconcile all that together? I mean, I guess I understand like the housing thing because it's sort of a project. I mean, it's earmarked, but the ED set aside seems, I mean, it's not specific for anything. So is it not something that under those articles should essentially go back to this? In this case, it wouldn't go anywhere because we're deficit spending. So we throw it into that.
Make a couple of comments.
Well, so you could go back however long this corporation's been in existence, and that never happened, that the money went back to the city as far as I recall.
Right, no, I understand
And
that.
so if if we were truly gonna do that, I think that that would have happened in the past. And so it was our way of, you know, traditionally,
Yeah.
we had a huge, amount of, money left over, and still, if you really look at this budget, we still do. So we're trying to accumulate the money so that it is, apparent to someone needing it that there's money there to be spent.
But are we
And so-
allowed to?
And so-
That's actually what I'm asking.
I have a couple-
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
through budgetary situation, it would be readily available. We got it on the budget, we decide that's where we want to use it, that's where we use it.
And historically, I think one of the issues, were you finished? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
One of the issues that we were finding was that even though we don't have it, you know, spelled out where we have to divide that between the 3 different categories evenly, as we would look at the numbers, economic development wasn't really, we weren't spending anything on it because nothing, and so it just kept rolling. So it was almost like 0, 0, 0. And we really wanted to show that, yes, we do believe that this part of these funds should in fact go to that, even though we haven't had specific projects to fund, to more evenly distribute among the 3 categories. So that was one of the reasons behind it. With regard to the deficit spending, as you're, you know, asking about, like Kenneth said, you know, the balance had gotten up pretty high. And so that's not our job, is to try to just build up that balance as high as we can and stock it away. I mean, the point is to use the funds as they're meant to be used. And so that's been our intent the last several years, to try to go ahead and get that balance more into a more reasonable level, that we can still anticipate projects to come, say, in the next several years, but at the same time not overspend. It looks like we're overspending, but it's because we had this balance that had risen pretty high. And not only that, our revenues were coming in higher than they kept increasing. So our revenues were growing, and so it was a means to use the money as we know it needs, in the kinds of projects that we know need to be spent.
That's where the
Spent
sports
for.
center was born.
It's an emergency fund for a wonderful surprise coming down the line.
And I think he gave us one earlier with the lift station, right? So that's kind of where I'm going with that, you know. But I understand. You know. So carry on.
That's all from me.
Thank you, EA.
Thank
Yes,
you.
sir. Again, we'll anticipate, based off this feedback, formalizing this and bringing this back to you
Next
for
month?
approval at the August meeting. Yes, sir.
So no action required today.
No, sir.
Thank
Just
you.
seeking your input. Thank you.
We've got another shot at it.
All right, that takes care of agenda item number 4B. Anyone have any reason for item number 5, executive session? If none, item number 6 is possible action. There is none. Anybody have anything, any items for future agendas? EA?
Just real quick, we have talked about with this group, as well as we've been having discussions with Mr. Brian O'Connor from KDC. We're going to bring in the TDC trainer, actually called Carlton Schwab, is that correct? From TEDC to provide the EIC training. They periodically do that around the state and go around quarterly. He's agreed to actually come to us so we can possibly have a joint meeting of this group as well as City Council and KDC kind of all in one room, and it'll be sort of customized for us. We were hoping, if your schedules allow, that we might be able to do that just a little bit earlier in the afternoon on August 21st, if everybody's amenable to that, and we can touch base with you guys individually. You don't have to answer here, but maybe starting that meeting around 2 o'clock. It'll probably be about a 2, maybe 2.5 hour training, and then we can roll right into our regular meeting, which we anticipate to be pretty short and still get you guys out of here probably about 5 o'clock.
That's just the next meeting date.
Next meeting,
Is
That'd be
it-
great.
Yes, sir. We're exploring August 21st.
Okay.
sounds good.
Okay.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else today?
No.
If none, let's adjourn the meeting. It's 5:24.